All right, well, thanks for coming, guys. I have to admit, sitting there, I wasn't nervous this morning, but now I am. So, in last month's leadership discussion, Gleaves actually said something that really stuck with me. So if you were here, you might remember it. He said, a leader must suppress his ego in order to build trust and integrity. And this is one of those quotes you can take at face value and say, okay, suppress the ego, build some trust, be a better leader. Perfect, great. Let's move on. But it really got me thinking, what is the ego? How do I suppress it? Do I even want to suppress it? And how does suppressing it build trust and integrity? So as a former psychology student, my first thought was, okay, Freud. Now if any of you have taken Psych 101, I'm sure we all have, id, ego, and superego. So the id is a primitive part of our mind. It's unconscious and it's primarily focused on self-gratification. The superego on the other end of the spectrum is about ideals, principles, spiritual guidance. It's where our conscious is, and it makes us feel guilty if we start to stray from those principles. Now, the ego is right in the middle, and it tries to mediate between the id and the superego. And it's responsible for functions like control, tolerance, judgment, planning. And the ego helps us to organize and make sense of the world around us. So I started to think about this, and then I started to think, well, it sounds like the ego is the only thing keeping me in check. So why would I want to suppress it? So who's right, Gleaves or Freud? Well, I felt like I needed to keep looking. So I went to the dictionary, and the dictionary said that the ego is the mind's way of separating myself from others. It defines it as the I. Okay, fine. And then I started to think about the practical use of the word ego. Like when people say, that guy has such an ego. Right? Now, this is clearly a negative quality. It's not something you want to be described as having. And it's related to being pompous, full of yourself, egotistical, and thinking you're the best. My way or the highway. Okay, now we're starting to get somewhere, I thought. And so Freud says the ego interprets reality. The dictionary says the ego separates me from everyone else. And vernacular says that the ego makes me think I'm better than everyone else. So the one thing I could tell for sure from all of this is that the ego has something to do with our mind and something to do with perceptions. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears entirely just a little bit. How often during the day, and I want your input on this, how often during the day are you thinking about what happened yesterday, what's going to happen later today, future scenarios, daydreaming? What percent of your day? Yeah, well, exactly, right? I mean, really, what do you, throw out a number, what
80%.
80%?
85%.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if we're really honest, it's a huge amount of time. It's a considerable part of our day. So, I mean, even now, you're probably thinking about, what am I going to eat for lunch? What am I going to do after I leave this room? And while that's a totally common way to live, there is another way. So I'm going to try an experiment with you guys. And I want you to close your eyes. And I'm serious. I want you to close your eyes. Go ahead. Close them. And I want you to say to yourself, I wonder what my next thought is going to be. Then I want you to become very alert and wait for that next thought. Be like a cat watching a mouse hole. What is going to come out of that mouse hole? And once you're very alert, as soon as a thought does enter, go ahead and open your eyes. But be very alert and wait for that next thought. Wow, excellent. Okay, go ahead and open your eyes. Some of you were doing a great job. I'm impressed. But what just happened? What did you experience? It was a fuzzy picture. It was a fuzzy picture? Okay. Did your mind get kind of quiet, though? No?
Not mine.
Not yours? No? Yours was moving? Okay.
Mine left.
Yours left. it left the image. Okay.
You said a cat. So
Right, and that's instantly what you're thinking about. Did anybody experience a sense of quiet, of just being present and waiting? A couple of you? Yeah, the two people who were able to keep their eyes closed the longest. But, okay, so I want you to remember this experience as we continue, okay? During all this trying to decode the ego started to sound like something separate from myself. Something that I could distance myself from and actually look at. So when I had that realization, my mind became very quiet, very still, peaceful. And I felt this connection to everything around me, and I was fully present in the moment. And that's what I tried to recreate with you, was that sense of being fully present and alert and aware of what's going on. And it was something that I had never experienced before, but almost instantaneously, I mean, it was a matter of seconds that I had this feeling. Thoughts started to rush back in, and I was thinking about everything else I had to do that day. But what was left was an understanding that I'm able to separate from my thoughts. I'm able to sit back and watch the thoughts that are coming in. So now you might be thinking, great, Juliana, I can watch my thoughts. What does this have to do with leadership? Well, I'm getting there, but one more little exercise before we do. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody who's clearly thinking about other things? Yeah, we all have. And how did you feel about that interaction? Did you feel important? No. Did you want to keep sharing with that person? No. And chances are you could tell that you are not this person's priority. So, as I mentioned before, part of being a leader is the ability to build relationships full of trust and to act with integrity. But it's impossible to do either if our minds are constantly rushing and constantly spinning, and you're not in the present moment. So, now comes in that first exercise that we did. Some of you, hopefully eventually all of you, were able to separate from your mind. You were able to distance yourself from your thoughts, and during the separation, you became fully conscious of the present moment. You weren't thinking about the past or the future or your long to-do list after you leave this room. You were completely in the now, as they say. And the ego can mean a lot of things, but through this, I believe it's our identification with our thoughts and our inability to be fully present. And when you're able to recognize that you're separate from your thoughts or your ego, you can begin to control it and suppress it and move into a constant state of presence. So as a leader, it's essential that we put relationships and people first. And people can sense when you are present and when you're fully engaged. By being completely in the now and not thinking about everything else that's already happened or is going to happen, you can build trust and act with integrity easily. The benefits of being fully present and living in the now reach far beyond the scope of this discussion. By suppressing the ego and learning to quiet the mind, you're able to identify with your true being and purpose. External events won't shake your sense of self, and we can save time, energy. You can be more content, feel less anxiety. The list really goes on and on. And all that we have is the present moment. Nothing else is real. And by leaving the ego behind, we can become better leaders and more in tune with ourselves and those around us. Now, I don't know if Gleaves intended to open this can of worms with his previous statement, but I certainly think he was right. A leader must learn to suppress his ego in order to build trust and integrity. Moving into a constant state of presence isn't an easy task, but I think it's certainly a journey worth embarking upon. So I hope that you continue to try and practice living in the present by watching your thoughts and taking time to look around you. And I mean, really look. Put away your iPod and your cell phone and your laptop and listen to the silence between sounds. Look at the trees. I mean, it's a beautiful day. Really look, and look at the people's faces as they walk by you. Really look at them. And you'll not only become a more effective leader by doing this, but you'll start to realize the interconnectedness of all things, and you'll experience better relationships filled with trust and integrity. Thank you. You guys have any questions or comments or?
Well, I want to say thank you for a message that too often is lost. you know, so much leadership training focuses on action and decision making, but there's an this reminds me of the old Transcendental Meditation message from back in the 60s.
Okay.
The Beatles took it up, you know, on their tour of India and all, but the metaphor that was constantly used in the 60s and 70s for this kind of thing was that of the arrow. You know, to go forward, you have to draw it back. You have to draw back, quiet, still, you know, still point. CSO writes about it. I just thought that was a very helpful message. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you are at all interested in this, I wish I could claim, you know, this was entirely my idea. But I have a couple books actually that led me down this path. And so if you're interested at all, I'd be happy to share this with you.
What are
they? They are, yeah, sure. It's actually one author. His name's Eckhart Tolle. He's a spiritual leader. And his books that I really enjoyed were The Power of Now. And it's all about, you know, the tactical knowledge of learning how to live in the present, and A New Earth. And it really teaches you about your life's purpose and how to get in touch with your being and who you really are. They're very powerful books.
I'll offer one example that comes to mind. We took the leadership fellows down before we actually had this model of our leadership academy. It was something much different. Students were writing 40-page papers and doing all kinds of things. You guys have your 40-page papers out?
No.
So we took a group of them down to Notre Dame to meet with Peter Hesper, who was president of the University of Notre Dame for a quarter century, a little longer. He was one of the very few presidents that actually survived sort of the social upheaval in the 60s. Most presidents lost their jobs because of student uprisings, and they just couldn't handle it and ended up out. But not only did Hesper make it through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s and 90s, but he did it with fantastic success. He's called the second founder of Notre Dame because of how much the campus changed. The endowment was 10 times larger in the end. He made it for the first time a top flight academic institution because it was more than an athletic institution before Hesper. So all of these things had this enormous impact on campus. At the same time, he served 8 different U.S. presidents in different capacities. He was the first Catholic priest ever to be made a ambassador. He was the U.S. ambassador to the UN, actually, to the atomic, not the UN, the atomic, yeah, that's right. I can't even name them all, but he served 8 presidents, starting with, I'd have to go back. I've always lost track of my history here with that Hesper. But Jimmy Carter looked at him once, for example, and said, "What can we do for you?" And he said, "I want to go up in whatever the fastest jet was at the time." And so they flew the fastest jet that the Air Force had at the time. But anyways, he's a man of extraordinary accomplishments at Notre Dame and away. He's an internationally known person who has a Peace Studies Center named for him, an International Studies Center named for him. And when we asked him during our visit, you know, how did you do all this? How did you accomplish so much with your life? Well, Civil Rights Commission, he was the first head of the Civil Rights Commission. It's called Hesper Commission. But how did you do all this with your life? And he said 2 things. First of all, I'm a Catholic priest. You don't have a wife. You don't have children. He's like, and that significantly increases my time. But he said the second thing is, I had 5 meetings before this one. I have 5 meetings after this one. But I'm not even thinking about who those are with. I have no idea what's going on with the rest of my day, because right now I'm here with you. And I'm here to hear what you have to say, and I'm here to share with you what you want to know. And I'll deal with that other stuff later. But it's exactly this notion that you're talking about. And that's the only way that through his whole career he was able to accomplish so much. There was so much going on, and so many leaders experienced this, but he had to be able to focus on the needs of that moment throughout his career. And so it's very much sort of that mindfulness, that presence you're talking about. That's for me is a model of it.
It's a great point. I think especially while, you know, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, that's your purpose at that moment. I mean, it might not be your grandiose purpose, but if all we really have is right now, then what you're doing right now is your purpose. So to fully engage in it, otherwise you're going to miss it.
And I think focusing on that too, you mentioned that decreases your stress.
Definitely.
I mean, even if you have so much going on, but if you're constantly thinking of everything else, it's an easy way to not accomplish anything and just spend your whole day thinking of what I need to do, but just go with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what anxiety is, right? Anxiety is thinking about all the things you have to do or what could happen. If you're able to just be here, what's there to worry about?
Not exactly the hallmark of American life, is it?
No.
Presence in the moment.
I think at that point, though, that you're driving home, Juliana, that being really present for somebody, Theodore Roosevelt, since we've recurred to him a few times, was described as sitting, when you spoke with him in the White House, sitting stock still. I mean, he would just get a beat on you, and he was really listening intensely to what you were saying. And I think that quality of really, there are things, this might seem a little bit out there, but let me suggest this is kind of a little bit of an Aristotelian perspective. Sometimes we have to act like a habit is ours before the habit is instantiated.
Definitely.
And the habit then actually sends the message to the brain of how to do something, how to respond. So, for example, if I tend to be really flighty, all the time, looking around and distracted, and Christy comes in and talks to me about something, I have to be trained to just be still, make my hands still, and look her in the eye, and listen to what she has to say. And then that can reinforce this presence, this present-mindedness that you're talking about. I think it's a very useful technique. Just do what your brain is trying to program you to do. Just do the action. And then your brain, and you're a psychology major, but your brain gets more attuned to it and actually reinforces itself. But then you'll see an improvement actually in your behavior and in your thinking.
Definitely. Even just being able to acknowledge that your mind is somewhere else. Well, as soon as you do that, you're right back into the present. So, it doesn't have to be this lofty, like, how do I do it? It's very simple, you just keep doing that and train yourself. So it's definitely accomplishable. It's definitely something you can achieve. So.
Is there somebody in your life who practices this that you not just have read about, but have actually seen it and learned from?
Not in so much that I've had a conversation with them about it, but like you were saying, when you're talking with somebody, there are those people who you'll meet, and when they look at you, it feels like they're looking, deep into your mind and your soul. Those people, it's very rare, but I think we've all met them at one point where they are looking at you, and you hope that there's nothing, you wonder what they're seeing. But I've had those experiences with people, and that has sort of started to inspire me to be like that. And other life experiences where, like I recently lost my job, and that was something that could have gone either way. I think a lot of people can take that very, very hard and take it personally. But if you're able to live in the present, you can accept it and act. It doesn't destroy your sense of self. And so also out of that experience, I was really able to work through this process and learn that just because something happens, it doesn't destroy your being, it doesn't destroy who you are. You're still Juliana, still, still me. And so that's kind of where I started to